Hello, pen friends. Welcome to my bathroom. Never thought you'd hear me start a video that way, did you? So I have, and I don't know how well I'll be able to show it here on camera, a massive load of pens that need cleaning. And that's only probably about a third of what needs to be cleaned. And I'm about to head out on a trip, and I am about to ink up a bunch of new pens before I go and take a bunch of empty pens with me. So I figured now would be as good a time as any to kind of walk you through my cleaning process. I get a lot of questions about this. So I'm going to walk you through how I clean my pens. And the reason I am standing in front of my bathroom sink is because this is where I do my pen cleaning. I find it a lot easier than having separate cups of water or things as other people have done for a couple of reasons. So first, I find that these little syringes, let me just make sure, oh, sorry. It's hard to focus this camera. Let's try this. There we go. Okay, sorry. I might just have to move this over a little bit closer to me here. Now that's weird because it shows up in the camera. Anyway, if you don't have an ink syringe, you really need to get one. They are invaluable tools in cleaning. And fortunately, because I use ink syringes to ink up every now and again, I often have dirty ones, so I'm going to start by cleaning that. It's just a little bit of clean water to empty out the syringe. If I remember correctly, I believe this was, oh geez, what ink was this? Brown ink. I think this might be Monteverde brown sugar. No, just clean it out. Okay, so now I've got a clean ink syringe. Now I use these quite a bit, and I'll show you how in just a second here, but I think I'm going to go ahead and start off with this, my Danny Trio here. So this is my Danny Trio Takumi. First thing I do is I always rinse out the cap. Cool water, just a little bit, fill it up with water, rinse out the cap. I almost always find a little bit of ink in there. Just shake it a few times, and then I keep a paper towel right here next to the sink, and I just let stuff dry, air dry. Remove the barrel, set that aside, and then we get to the pen. Now this is my technique. It's maybe not the best technique, but it's what I do. So with the sink running very lightly, I expel any remaining ink and suck in some fresh water, and I do this a few times just to get things going. I want to make sure that I've got a really, I want to get the bulk of the ink out because the next step is a little tricky. So once I do that, I'll just throw the converter down at the bottom of the sink and grab this little plastic container. Now this container came with my, my iron. It's what I'm supposed to use to fill my iron, and my iron's just in the closet next door, so I keep it in here. So I'm going to use this bulb syringe. I just filled it up with cool water, and then I'll try to get this so you can actually see on the camera here. I just very slowly expel water through the feed, and like this. Now, as I'm doing this, you'll notice every now and again I stop pushing and let air get sucked back in. I do this for a couple of reasons. The first one is that pushing, my experience has shown that pushing water through your nib and feed like this gets out some of the ink, but it doesn't get out all of the ink. There are certain areas of the nib and feed, and especially in these friction fit nibs and feeds, where the ink kind of gets into spots that aren't going to be hit by pressure washing your nib, essentially. So I do it in pulses like that because I find I can get a little bit more out. And I've got another step that I'll get to in just a second. So I'm going to set this aside for now that it's mostly rinsed it out, and I'm going to take care of the converter. So the converter here, just kind of fill it up with water and empty it out a couple times. And I like to do the fill and flick. So I fill it up and then I just flick the ink out. I find that I discover some ink up toward the top of the converter usually that gets dislodged when I do that a couple times. And then the final step for me with cartridge converter pens is I fill up the pen using the little, I fill it up as I would normally. So just stick it in the water and fill it up normally. Now, you'll notice, despite the fact that I pressure washed the pen, there's still ink in there in that system, and I filled it up as you would normally. So I will do this a few times. I'm actually going to move this down here into the sink. Do this a few more times, fill it up, and rinse it out. Fill it up, rinse it out, fill it up until it gets, I'd say, 95% of the way clear. It's probably hard to tell in the video here, but this is mostly clear. There's just a tiny tint of blue in there, but I'm not going to worry about it. Now, the final thing that I do is I fill it up with water and I leave the clean water in there, and then I have this little rig. I call this my draining rig. So it's just a piece of cardboard. I fold it into kind of this funky shape, and some paper towels that I, quadrupled on themselves and folded up. And it sits just right here behind the backsplash, or right by the backsplash of my sink. I'm going to show you what I do while it's on camera here, and then I'm going to move it off to the side because you can't see it. But basically, I take the pen filled with water, nib down, and I just prop it, nib down, on that paper towel. Now, if the nib is well adjusted, I find that the paper towels will wick the moisture out, usually within 20-30 minutes or so, and it pulls out a lot more ink that way, rather than just letting it, doing the draining like I did before. I find I get it super, super clean this way. A lot of times I will do this and I'll find a lot of color in the drained spot. And that's an indication to me that maybe there was more ink in there than I realized. Now, if you use the same ink all the time, you don't need to go to these lengths. This is a lot. I do this because I almost never use the same ink twice. So now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and slide this over because I like to prop it up against the wall to keep the nibs from falling over and getting bent and that sort of stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay. So now usually what I do, I like to go and just clean out the sink because especially with certain inks and certain colors of ink, they can actually stain the porcelain. For instance, the good old infamous Noodler's Bay State Blue, it will stain stainless steel. So you need to be careful not to let it get in the sink. And that's one of the reasons why I let the sink run while I do this. It's because it dilutes the ink kind of right then and there instead of letting it sit on the white porcelain and really run the risk of staining it. Let's grab this one next. This is the Aurora Optima. There's still a little bit of ink in here, but I'm sick of it, so I'm going to rinse it out. Again, grab the cap a couple times, make sure I got any ink that got flicked around from transport. I'm going to fill up my little plastic container and set that out of the way. And then I'm going to start doing the ugly stuff. So just using, this is a piston filler, so I'm just going to push all the ink out. There's a little bit left, not too much. Start filling it up with water. Repeat this several times. And through the magic of time lapse, I will be done here in just a moment. All right, I have flushed most of the ink out of this. It's very hard to tell on this video, I'm fairly certain. I'm not sure how in focus it's going to be. There's a little bit of ink left in there. You can still see a little bit of that orange color. This was Diamine Autumn Oak. But I filled it up with water. Now I'm going to do something that I cannot recommend, but I still do anyway, because it's awfully dangerous. And that is when I did the fill and flick with the converter, I also often do that with piston fillers. So I just take it, make sure you've got a real solid grip, and just flick the heck out of the pen. Some pens, this works better than others, but I just repeat this several times and get as much of the ink and the water out of the pen as possible. Now, there are various ways of doing this. The way I do it is not ideal for a couple reasons. One, I could drop the pen and destroy the nib. Two, I could hit the sink with the nib. I've never done either, but that's not to say I won't someday. The reason I tend to do this with piston fillers is that I find piston fillers I love their ink capacity, but I find them a pain to clean. And as much as I love the Aurora Optima, the piston's got this weird little thing where it'll hold on to some extra ink. So if you run out of ink while you're writing, you can basically twist the piston and you'll get a little extra. Well, that's great for writing, but it makes cleaning this thing just a downright beast. I'm going to flick a little bit of the extra out. And it's now empty. The pen is now empty. I will say that I still see a little bit of orange in here. It is not as bad as it was, so I'm going to fill it up again from my little plastic container and do another series of fill and flicks here. Again, you'll find that if you do this, you will often dislodge a little extra ink toward the back that you didn't realize you had in there. This is, as I said, absolutely in no way, shape, or form recommended. It's just what I do. As I mentioned earlier, there are other ways to do this. Some people have built contraptions with salad spinners where they can basically use centrifugal force to pull the ink out of the pen. Centripetal, I can never remember which is which, and I'm sure someone will tell me in the comments, but this is basically what I do to clean out my piston fillers and some of my vintage pens. I've got a Duofold Vacuumatic and that is just a pain to clean. Same thing with the Edison, what is it? The Edison Menlo I have with the pump filler. This is how I clean that pen as well. The Edison's a little easier because you can take it apart, but I don't like to do that very often, so I generally tend to flick it. So I'm going to go ahead and squeeze out, or just use the piston to push out the rest of the water here. Flick it a couple more times, and that's pretty darn good for this pen. I'll fill it up with water, and then I will set it up here and let it drain. All right, going to clean out the sink. Fill up the container. Maybe let's move on to one of the good old standbys, the Visconti Homo Sapiens Bronze Age. This is another one that is just a right pain in the tuchus to clean. I'm going to go ahead and clean out the cap. I don't know if you can see that, but the water is colored. So there is certainly some ink that got into the cap from being carried around in my laptop bag for a couple weeks while I was carrying it. Now this is one of those pens where it's really difficult to do this under running water. You really do need to submerge the section of the pen. So I just fill it up, and you'll notice as soon as I do that, I've basically contaminated my water. It's really hard to get a clean fill on this pen, or a fill of clean water, because as soon as you depress the plunger, you contaminate the water that you just used. So what I often do in this particular case is, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to leave it running, it might be a little noisy. I'm going to turn on the running water. So I push out the ink. I do that a couple times, run it under the water, then I put it back in the container, let it fill, push out the ink. Okay, so again, I've gotten the majority of the ink out. If I was one of those people that reused the inks over and over again, I'd do this maybe once a month, get 80% of it out of the way and call it good. As it is, because I'm a serial ink changer, I can't really do that. I've got to get it thoroughly clean. So flick out some ink, and you probably can't see it very well in the sink, and my camera's not a camcorder, so it's hard to refocus it, but in the sink here, I got basically some undiluted ink. So I clearly, from flushing it the normal way, did not get all of the ink out. So now I'm going to Fill it up again. I'll finish emptying it out, rinse it, fill it up again. And flick it clean. Much cleaner this time, although I'm still getting a few drops of undiluted ink, so those are probably from the section, I'm guessing. I could, if I really wanted to, unscrew the nib unit on this pen, and I have done that when I've had a particularly difficult time cleaning the pen, but I don't like to do it very often because, you break the plastic housing on these nibs. It can be tricky to get replacements, and sometimes sending these pens in for repair is not my favorite thing to do. So just flush it a few more times. And every now and again, I will go back and forth between methodologies. I'll do the fill and flick a few times, and then I'll go back to flushing with water, and then do the fill and flick a couple more times. Just whatever it takes to get the ink out. All right, this is running mostly clear. I think it's probably as clear as I was going to get it. Now, if I had my ultrasonic cleaner out, I would probably run this through the ultrasonic cleaner, but I think I'm going to save that for another video because I've had a couple questions on how to use ultrasonic cleaners and I want to talk you through that. So maybe I'll do that in a separate video. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and fill this and just let it drain on the draining rig here. Just prop it up next to the other ones. So that's basically my process. I will just stand here at the sink for an hour, hour and a half sometimes, and clean through a huge backlog of pens. One thing I didn't mention, I mentioned early on, like if you don't have one of these, you should get one. A lot of times when I will use this, I will use them in the converters themselves. So I have some converters like these miserable Con 70s that the only way I have found to get them clean is to basically inject them full of water. And then if you hold your finger over the edge and pump, you'll get some of that water behind the seal in the back here and actually get most of the ink out. So, and then usually what I'll do is once all of the pens have drained, I will put them out here. I might rinse them once or twice more into the water. I'll put them out on the paper towels and just let them sit for usually a minimum of 24 and usually more like 48 hours in order to get them fully air dry. Then I'll reassemble them, put them back in the case, and they're ready to go for next time. So anyway, thank you for joining. That is how I clean my pens. I'm sure a lot of people out there just cringed when I did some of this stuff. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. Let me know what you do to clean your pens. Maybe I am making this more complicated than it needs to be. Certainly wouldn't be the first time I've done that. Anyway, thanks for joining, and we'll see you soon on another video here on The Pen Habit. Bye.